Hi everyone, Paige Abbott here. Today I'm going to talk about boundaries in time, space, and beyond. Stay tuned. So I had some people on social media requesting a video on the topic of boundaries. So here we go, revisiting a topic that is very near and dear to my heart and something that I believe is critical for our mental and emotional well-being. Interestingly, it's also something that I would say most human beings do quite poorly. And I think part of that is lack of information, lack of education. Most of us were modeled quite poor boundaries and may continue to exhibit poor boundaries in our lives. A lot of people believe that boundaries are selfish and ignore or violate the needs of others. When we're establishing boundaries, we're trying to do it in a respectful and basically quietly assertive way for ourselves. We don't need to be aggressive. We don't need to be hurting other people as we're taking care of ourselves. We're just doing our best to look after our needs and act in accordance with our values. So how can boundaries look in practice? I think that's a question that's really important for us to explore. And I thought to do that I would break down boundaries into three categories. There's time boundaries, there's space boundaries, and there's emotional boundaries. So time boundaries are basically when you're trying to establish a time frame for a project or a gathering or a situation that's in alignment with your needs and your capacity. So whether that's at work or in your personal life, it is okay to assert yourself and to be clear on your needs. And in fact, I would say that the people around you will probably really value that and be grateful for that. Now, they may not always like it because people often get used to us not having boundaries. So for instance, somebody who as a coworker is always saying yes to something and then all of a sudden is saying no to things or establishing more realistic time frames. Do you think that the people around them are going to like that? No, of course not. They got used to being able to go to that person and dump projects on them or ask them questions and have things answered immediately. But that likely was not working for the person on the receiving end of that. That's what can lead to burnout and people feeling so fatigued that they can't function anymore. And it can also exacerbate or precipitate mental health or addiction related issues just because of the stress of that. So it's such a critical thing for us to do. But we have to remember with boundaries that those around us may not always be receptive or like it at first. But that doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong or bad. It simply means that you're doing something different. So time boundaries. This can sound like somebody coming to you, making a request, and you responding with a more realistic time frame that fits for you. So someone asking, hey, I need this by the end of the day. Actually, that's not going to work for me. I'll be able to get it done by fill in the blank, whatever the time frame is. If you have someone in your personal life who's requesting to do something and they're proposing one time frame, if that doesn't work for you or fit with your needs, then you can propose an alternate time frame. It's also important with boundaries to remember that it's always okay to say no. I know that in our world, we have a difficult time with that. We worry about disappointing or hurting or impacting the person on the receiving end of the no. However, it is always an appropriate response. If it's not something that you are able to do or are going to do in the future, then saying yes when you have no intention to follow through on that is basically just lying. So I think if we can move towards more honesty in our relationships, is that not ultimately a better thing? I certainly think so. Another example of boundaries are the space boundaries. So this may look like somebody physically being very close to you, and if you're uncomfortable with that, you can literally step back. This may involve physical touch, so somebody giving unwarranted touches, hugs, kisses, whatever it happens to be. We may need to use our body language to pull back and move away from that interaction. We can also use our words to uphold those space needs and boundaries that we have for ourselves. So that may sound like, I'm not comfortable with that type of touch. Can we please not hug? I'm not okay with that type of kissing or touching. Please stop. This is making a request of the other person. They may or may not listen. With boundaries, we ultimately have to be prepared to take action and uphold what our needs are. So with a physical space boundary, we need to be prepared to advocate for ourselves. Hopefully this is a non-threatening, non-critical situation. Obviously, if it was, then we may actually need to physically defend ourselves. But hopefully, if you're able to physically remove yourself or pull back, then you'll be able to be safe and uphold your boundary. The third category are emotional boundaries. These are tricky ones because often we don't even know what we need. And I would say a big part of that is because we're not tuning into our feelings that come up as we go through our day and our world. So this would be a starting point of emotional boundaries, is starting to pay attention to how things impact you, what things you like, what things you're comfortable with, what things you're not. And this can be memories, this can be thoughts, this can be conversations, activities, workplace interactions and tasks, products that you use. Everything in your world brings a reaction to you. How tuned in are you to those reactions you're having? My guess is probably not very, because that's human nature. We go through, we take things for granted, we don't really tune in. So the starting point of emotional boundaries, to know what you need, we need to know what we need to uphold that. So paying attention to how things are impacting us as we go through gives us an idea of that. So for instance, if we have a conversation with somebody and we notice that afterwards we think back and go, wow, that conversation actually made me really angry. Well, now we can start to think about, what would I have needed in that situation? Well, maybe I needed to take some space. Maybe I needed to share my feelings with that person. Maybe I needed to express things differently than I did. Now we have some information for how our future engagement and boundaries are going to look. We may also want to ask ourselves, what do we need at that moment? That's also part of our emotional boundaries. How can we take care of ourselves after situations have caused a reaction within us? So maybe at that moment you need to move your body. Maybe you need to take some fresh air, call a friend, do some journaling, do some meditation, do some reading. There's so many different things that we can do to look after ourselves, but emotional boundaries start with the need to be tuned in and to take that time to reflect. Once we have a better sense of our needs and our feelings, then we can start to uphold those and back ourselves up as we go through our day and our lives. Again, you're not going to be a bulldozer. Doesn't mean that you're going to be disrespectful or not care about other people's perspectives. You may still ask people, well, what would you like? Or how does that work for you? And if they come back saying, well, that doesn't work for me at all, even though it was your preference, then you have to decide, is this a deal breaker for you? Meaning, was the preference that you expressed more than a preference? Was it a fundamental need? If so, I hope that you won't renege on that and you'll follow through on that. But if it was truly a preference, maybe it was about where you're going to go eat a meal, maybe that's something that you can have some flexibility in your boundaries with. And Ultimately, boundaries are flexible. They may change over time depending on our needs, our feelings, our circumstance, the people that we're with. So because you said or did something in one situation, having one type of conversation with one person doesn't mean that you're going to respond and react in the exact same way with another person if you're having a similar type of conversation, because you're different. You're a different person in that conversation than you were with the last person, because you're in a different context, different circumstance, different time, different space. So this is the reason that boundaries are tricky, because they do require flexibility. But ultimately, if you come back to the principle that boundaries are about having your own back, having basically that best friend who follows you around and who's checking in, going, how are you? Are you okay? Did that work? How are you feeling about that? That there's these conversations happening back and forth, and you know that ultimately you're in safe hands. That's the best that we can hope for as you navigate the world of boundaries. Thanks so much for watching this video. I hope that you'll tune into all of my social media as well as future videos here on YouTube. Take care. Bye for now.